We remain in a cost of living crisis. Our schools are falling apart. The NHS teeters on the edge of collapse. Strikes continue across multiple sectors. And now the largest local authority in the UK and Europe says it's run out of money. Birmingham City Council, responsible for services from street cleaning to schools, is in dire financial straits, apparently on the verge of bankruptcy. For now, it will only offer essential services. How? How on earth could a council the size of Birmingham's first run out of cash and second not see it coming? I'm Niall Paterson, and those are the questions we're asking on this edition of the Sky News Daily. Look, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, confession time. We do not pay enough attention to what local authorities and councils actually do. And I make this admission as a former political journalist. Such is the focus on Westminster. The key services that local government provides are often overlooked until we need to access them, or they disappear. In fact, such is the breadth of their responsibilities that it would almost be easier to list what they don't do. Sit tight, because this is a hell of a list. They are in charge of nurseries, schools, youth centres and the whole range of children's and family services. They look after roads, streetlights, public transport, road safety, social housing, housing benefit and welfare, services for older people, services for disabled people, those with learning disabilities, those with mental health care needs, asylum seekers, bins, recycling, environmental health, cemetery, cremation and mortuary services, fire and rescue, coroner's courts, planning policy, tourism, open spaces, recreation. They look after registration of marriages, births and deaths, and are a part of your life from cradle to grave in myriad ways that I've not actually had time to list here. Later, we will be discussing what Birmingham might be able to do to avert crisis and whether or not we should expect this to be happening time and again up and down the country. But let's begin with our political correspondent, Mhari Aurora.
Birmingham's quite unique because it's had this equal pay ongoing liability situation. That basically means workers sued the Birmingham City Council back in about 2012, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favour. Now, this was because male-dominated jobs were being essentially paid more, they were getting bonuses, whereas female-dominated jobs weren't, and therefore it wasn't equal pay. The issue now is about £1 billion has already been paid out in this settlement, and this settlement continues to grow and spiral. So now we've got about £760 million that the Birmingham City Council needs to find. It doesn't have that money. Also, on top of that, there's an IT system, the Oracle IT system, that essentially has been a bit of a botched job. So it was supposed to cost about 19 million, and it's now expected potentially to cost about 100 million. And again, the council can't afford that, which is why they're in this big financial mess.
What are the consequences of a Section 114 notice? What are the consequences of Birmingham City Council, let's not forget, not just the largest in the UK, but the largest in Europe, running out of money?
Well, that's the real issue. The consequences are actually quite dire, potentially. We know that there is some speculation. Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, has been talking about this, that council tax could potentially go up. That is what a lot of these councils, when they go bust, end up doing. Croydon has done it, Thurrock has done it, a few different councils have done that in the past, where essentially they need to find the money, so they have to increase council tax. That could really have a big impact on people's pockets when it comes to the fact that we are still in a cost of living crisis. There is a huge amount of deprivation in Birmingham. I am from Birmingham myself. The other issue is, when it comes to increasing council tax, some people argue that actually it's not necessarily the best instrument for a financial situation like this, because areas that have a lot of money, properties more expensive, you then get more money from your council tax if you increase council tax, whereas areas of deprivation, areas where property costs less, you're going to get less revenue from your council tax. So there are lots of things that could potentially be done, but they would need to get that sign-off from government.
I mean, that's it. That's exactly the point, isn't it? That on the one hand, Birmingham City Council will now be restricting themselves to only essential services, and we'll be delving into that a little later in the podcast. But on top of that, if they are to raise money, they're going to be raising it from the local population. The mistakes that have been made on none of their shoulders fall. So I then go back to the original point. mean, Birmingham City Council, what on earth are they saying about this? What is the leadership of the council suggesting was the problem, and what are they suggesting is the solution?
Well, Birmingham City Council are being relatively tight-lipped on this. So they pointed me to this statement, and they talked about how essentially the unsustainable growth of its equal pay liability between 650 million and 760 million is the issue. But they wouldn't really give me a steer on essentially how this was allowed to happen. And so we're still left with all these kind of unanswered questions that the people of Birmingham and the people of the UK really want to know, because people are going to ask themselves, well, this could happen to me, maybe could this happen in my area? But the issue is that there are other councils that are really struggling, potentially may in the future file for bankruptcy.
None of which, of course, would lead me to believe that the Conservatives are not going to make some sort of hay out of this. I mean, it has been a stick often used to beat the back of the Labour Party, the Labour movement, that whenever they're in power, they rack up debts, they financially mismanage, and this is the end result.
We saw Rishi Sunak just in PMQs, and he said, Labour have already bankrupted Birmingham, we cannot let them bankrupt Britain. The danger with that, though, is we have an overall sense, an overarching sense of national decline. We have a situation where sewage is running into our rivers and waterways and hasn't been really sorted out yet. We have schools collapsing and unsafe concrete in about 150 schools so far as we know, across the country. And now we have this huge council, the biggest, as you say, Neil, in Europe, going bust. And although the government and although Rishi Sunak is going to want to very much leave this at Labour's door and say this is what happens when you get Labour, I think the danger is that actually you end up just with a situation where people have an overarching sense of just nothing's working, everything's a bit rubbish, and at the end of the day, central government get a beating for it.
Now, there can be an awful lot of technical jargon at times like this, which is no doubt pretty worrying if you're a Birmingham resident or in another part of the country where, for whatever reason, the council's books look just a little cooked. Iain Murray is Head of Public Financial Management at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. Iain, walk us through, if you can, exactly what a Section 114 notice is and just how much of a badge of shame is it?
Section 114 notice is named after the bit of legislation that it comes from, which is the Local Government Act, and effectively is a public acknowledgement from a council, from a local authority, that it can't balance its budget, that its outgoings are going to exceed its incomings. Framing it as a badge of shame probably overstates things slightly. What the 114 is designed to do is create a breathing space or a fire break, if you like, when a council feels that its financial position is getting out of control. It also gives chief financial officers some statutory responsibilities and some statutory powers to basically call out things, and it's an opportunity for organisations to acknowledge that publicly and then look to recover and reset.
When you say that it provides them a bit of breathing room, a kind of a point at which a point of reflection, in what way?
Councils will only spend money on those existing contractual commitments or against statutory services. So there's an immediate block on kind of any additional expenditure at that point. The notice is only the start of a process. After issuing the notice, there is a 21-day period. Within that 21-day period, the council has to hold a full council meeting to discuss the notice and its future plans.
So this is by no means necessarily a point of no return?
Absolutely not. I think the opposite in some cases.
I was going to ask, how on earth can a council run out of money? But I suppose the ways in which a council can run out of money are as myriad as the ways in which any of us can run out of money. So maybe the better question would be, how does a council not recognise that it is running out of money, that it is approaching this point?
We've seen some probably different scenarios play through in the last 12 months about councils finding themselves in this position. I mean, fundamentally, funding for local authorities has been cut quite significantly over the last decade. So local authorities have actually done, as a sector, they've done a very good job of continuing to deliver services with less and reducing resource. Against that backdrop, they've also, some of them have taken risks, some of them have taken undue risk and kind of excessive amounts of risk with public money. So I think some of this is an accumulation of lots of issues that have been there for a while. And I think what we're seeing now is maybe a tipping point, a watershed moment for the sector. In most cases, these things will have been carefully thought through and haven't happened overnight.
It certainly feels like in recent years we have noticed an increase in the number of local authorities, local councils that have found themselves in, if not in this position, the position the Birmingham City Council has found itself in, then they're in some dire financial straits. So what can they do about it? When a black hole appears in their finances,
they will look at the services they're delivering and how they can deliver them in the most cost efficient way, making sure that they're also meeting the needs of their residents. That's what local authorities are here to do. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to maybe get to a point where we need to also ask the question, which is, well, what is it we want local government to do for us? What are the services that it provides? And are we funding local government as a sector appropriately enough to deliver against all of those needs? But the things a local government or a local authority will do are not any different to what any other business will do when it finds itself in this position. It will look at its cost base. It will look at what it's doing. It will look at its opportunities to reduce cost, to increase revenue. But the levers are quite limited in some respects. And obviously, they're not commercial bodies. They're not profit-making bodies, so that they're here to deliver services.
Do you think that as we proceed, just as a natural consequence of this drop in real terms funding for local authorities, do you think it is a likelihood that we are going to see more Section 114s?
I think we probably will see more before we're through this. I think there's been a lot of stories in the press over the last 2 to 3 weeks about general sense within the sector that the budget setting for this year and for next year are going to be incredibly difficult. And so I suspect we will see more councils feeling the need to issue 114 notices. I think the important thing to say is they're not a solution. They may be a step along the way to a solution, but regardless of whether you decide to issue a 114 notice or not, the hard work that then has to be done in terms of, well, what's the financial recovery plan?
Thanks, Iain. In just a moment, we'll try to work out what next for Birmingham City Council. Anyone suggesting that Birmingham City Council is alone in running out of money would be wide of the mark. Councils in different parts of the country with varying demographics and political leadership have also found themselves floundering. Take Slough Borough Council. It issued its Section 114 notice back in 2021, stating it needed to find savings of £20 million a year. Sarah Hayward became Slough's Executive Director of Strategy and Improvement after the collapse, and she joins me now.
In Slough, we invested in a lot of property on the basis of making a return on that property, and those in different ways. And in the end, those returns didn't materialise. In Thurrock, it was investing in particular businesses that they thought were going to generate income for them. In Croydon, similarly, it was investing in property. And there's reasons why councils decided to go down that route. And what's at the heart of all of those is really making bad decisions about those investments because the governance wasn't good enough to support that decision making.
Mm-hmm. So what then did you do? I mean, there must be precious few options on the table for you, bar selling stuff off, borrowing money, finding efficiencies.
So in Slough, we are selling off our assets and we're using some of those receipts to plug holes in the budget while we make cuts to services to actually balance our budget. So we are thinking about things like reducing frontline services where they're non-life and limb services. And there are going to be some tough decisions in doing that to get the council's budget back down to what we can afford to spend. And those decisions are taking place in the other councils that have issued 114 as well. When we've right-sized ourselves, we'll then be able to look at what the priorities are and potentially build back up. But that is a long way off for the residents of Slough, sadly.
Look, just from what you're saying, Sarah, anytime a local authority, a piece of local government finds itself in these circumstances, can we trace everything back to poor governance, to decisions that were taken by elected representatives or indeed senior people within the local government machinery itself?
So I think it would be quite sweeping to say everything. Certainly the investment in property that Slough made was poorly done, but that also masked a whole load of other deficiencies in the local authority. I would say the backdrop for the sector for 15 years, really since the crash at the end of the 2000s, has been really challenging. We're not the part of the public sector that attracts most protection from spending. And at the same time, time, demand for social care in particular, but other services as well, has escalated.
In simple terms then, are we seeing local government looking for other revenue streams, other ways of making money to make up significant shortfalls in that which they're getting from central government or indeed from the local tax take?
So lots of local authorities over the last 15 years have sought different ways of generating income. And actually, there have been some really successful examples, as well as the poorer examples like Slough. Councils do make income off normal day-to-day activity as well. And actually, some of the more innovative income generating schemes, like these property deals, like the investments that Thurrock and Croydon made, need to be very well governed because they're not in the core business. And so actually where some of the issues are is whether councils are getting in the right specialist expertise to manage the new income generating activity that they're trying to develop. And that's been a big problem in some of the councils as well.
But even with the reduction in budgets that councils have seen up and down the country, we're still talking about fairly significant amounts of money, particularly when you add on top the other ways in which councils and authorities can raise their cash. So I'm just wondering, I mean, are local councillors the best people to be in charge of this stuff?
I've dedicated my career to local government, and I believe in local democracy and decisions being made as close to residents as possible. And in my experience, local councillors tend to be really dedicated to the job. I do think sometimes there are issues about people understanding the level of responsibility that they've got. But as officers, we have to work with members to make sure that they understand their role and their information that's being presented to them. And I think whether it's local or national, having politicians that are elected from the populace to be representative is the right way to go about decision making. We're
in a situation right now where, of course, I mean, you find any part of the public sector that it hasn't got its hand outstretched, looking for more money right now, and I'd be very, very surprised. But genuinely, these problems that we have seen, and Birmingham is by no means the only place, as your own experience has shown us, there will be more of them. I mean, ultimately, could most of these problems have been avoided if, for the last few years, we had seen the real terms increase in local authority budgets that local authority leaders have been calling for?
So I think it's arguable that some of the capital projects that have happened and gone wrong might not have been so attractive had there been more money in the budgets. But that doesn't belie the fact that certainly in Slough's case, and Croydon, where I was before I came here, had some systemic problems that meant that they didn't make these decisions well, and actually they backfired. And the fact that they backfired was predictable had there been good decision making and good information supplied to members. So I do think that's only one part of the story. Undoubtedly, local government budgets are stretched. Undoubtedly, they've been stretched really for 15 years. And I don't think you'll find anyone, officer or elected councillor in local government, that wouldn't argue for more money. But I do think that what you're seeing at the moment certainly is problems that should have been spotted and avoided in local government. And that's why we are where we are, trying to fix Slough for the people of Slough.
And that is your lot for today. We'll be back again tomorrow. See you then.